This is Don McKinnon, town of Raynham, and the name of the show, I believe, this week is Small Town Talk or something like that, anyway, close to that. And what we do is take up certain things that occurred in the town of Raynham. Now, when I say that, you may see it smacks a little bit of the history of the town of Raynham. I don't look at it that way. I look at it more as, and I'll use the word, a chronicle. It's a chronicle of the town of Raynham. I hope someday the town of Raynham, in its infinite wisdom, will decide to hire a professional historian to write the history of the town of Raynham, which would be light on the beginning side and then into, say, the 1950s on up to that's half a century, 50 up to the year 2000. And then, of course, now this broadcast comes through in 2019, and I hope it comes up to in around that particular time by a professional historian. And what I'm attempting to do is to establish tapes of shows that a professional historian will look at when that particular person is attempting to write the history of the town of Raynham, to see events that molded the town of Raynham into what it is today. Now, in prior broadcasts, I've said Raynham is the town of education. We were, we are, and we believe we shall be a town of education. Communities have a very difficult time changing their stripes, what they do. And as a result of that, it's best to stay within your own character. And so therefore, Raynham, in setting up programs, should now and in the future set up programs of an educational nature so that it can maintain its structure. Now, in the previous half-hour show, I took up what was called the hazardous waste site. Now, Raynhamites and newly arrived citizens, you're going to know what location I'm talking about because I'm going to give you the key store in that location and rate you. You're going to say right away, oh yeah, I know where it is. And the name of the store is Walmart. Now, Walmart in the town of Raynham is located in what appears to be an industrial site of businesses and very little retail at all. And we'll get into why Walmart get in there. That's another story. But what occurred was, in the early 70s, the Commonwealth of Mass was attempting to locate a site for what's called hazardous waste. And in our prior broadcast, we made available to you the fact that in attempting to put it into the East Taunton site, opposite what's called the Martin Middle School in Taunton, the legislature voted not to allow it because at that time, Edward Ted Alexo, the representative, was very active in Boston in the legislature and managed to prevent the hazardous waste from going to East Taunton. So that left three prime locations: Warren, Mass., which is in the midwestern part of Massachusetts, Middleborough, which is in the south part of Massachusetts, and Raynham, which is in the south part of Massachusetts. Those were three communities that were considered advantageous to sites of hazardous waste. Now, it wasn't particularly on the line of community, which I've said that often occurs, that if you're going to have something that nobody wants, you put it on someone else's line, and you hope they think more of it in another communities than your own. But this case here, this was too big. This was almost, well, it was very large, a hazardous waste site. And they needed hundreds of acres. And as a result of that, in Raynham, they found themselves a location which they thought was advantageous to a hazardous waste site. And it was a site that had, I'm going to use the term now, over 500 acres. In reality, it had closer to 1,000 acres, but they needed close to 600 acres for a hazardous waste site. And that was the location which now, if you can consider it, if you're familiar geographically, is you've got Route 44, which comes from Taunton towards Middleborough, and then you've got Route 24, which comes down by Brockton and ends up down the Fall River area. That particular site was advantageous for a hazardous waste site, and Governor King, who had lost his bid to put the hazardous waste site in East Taunton, surrendered it to the businesses. And now I'll go in just a little bit about the history of that particular location. When you see it now, it's probably 80%, maybe 90% occupied, mostly with Johnson & Johnson, legal firms, business firms of types, batteries, and it's just got a multitude of businesses. It also has the Walmart store. Now, I don't want to get ahead of it, so I'm going to try to stay in this section of the hazardous waste. They wanted to buy somewhere between 560 and 600 acres of land, and they wanted to place a hazardous waste site, and I'm going to use the word encapsule, meaning that they would have a liner, and the liner would be placed into this, I'll say 600 acres, and you would dump the hazardous waste into that site, and the container, whatever you call it, what canvas, whatever you think of it might be, you're as good as anybody else on it, would contain the hazardous waste, and the hazardous waste would relay dormant on that particular location. Well, here's your oldest political sign, not in my backyard. Obviously, the people in the neighborhood didn't want it, but the whole town didn't want it. And so names are going to come up now in the hazardous waste opposition, some of which you may know right down to this day, if you're a townee, we'll call you, or you're new to the town, so these names may not be familiar with you. Route 24 had an exit on Route 44. And as a result of that, Route 24 had access to that location. Now, what was that 1,000 acres in the center, if you will, of the town of Raynham almost, sitting there, unoccupied, barren, leveled off? What in the world caused that? I'm going to use a name which historically, maybe it will be corrected. Mitten. How'd you like that name? What's your name? My name is Mitten. A gentleman named Mitten owned a retail store that was famous in Boston area, Massachusetts, called Jordan Marsh, sometimes referred to as Jordan's. Jordan Marsh was the name of the retail outlet. Washington Street in the city of Boston, along with Filene's, Gilchrist, Raymond's, another store called Kennedy. You've heard that name before. Not that family, but a Kennedy. And so in Boston, these stores were famous. And Mr. Mitten, who owned a house down the Cape, thought to himself, what a great location, that, not Raynham now, what a great location off of Route 24 that would be, because I can take 1,000 acres and buy it for, 25 cents on the dollar at this time, level it off, and eventually what some people might refer to future as the mall in the around the Boston area, closer to Boston. I won't go into the details of that because that gets me off on other harangues, which I tend to do. But there was a location in around Boston that was good. But he thought, here's what he thought now. Here's a location of 1,000 acres. What's around it? A city of New Bedford, a city of Taunton, a city of New Bedford, a town of Raynham, Middleborough, Stoughton, all and down in the summertime in the Cape is just a wonderful location for people to shop. And I'm going to put my Jordan Marsh site on that location, and it was called the Jordan Marsh site. And there it sat. And as he gained ages, however, which we all do, don't we? As he became elderly, the trustees of Jordan Marsh took a look at that and said, something doesn't seem quite right. Isn't that the case it is sometimes with things that appear to be too good to be true? And what they said was, even though there be hundreds of thousands of people between New Bedford, Fall River, Taunton, and surrounding towns, even though it appears to be hundreds of thousands of people, could they support a Jordan Marsh site that might either be a shopping center or a shopping mall? And what they did was they did a study of incomes in that particular area, and they found out, today we use the term, don't we, blue collar, don't we, that there is now in an area either poor people or lower middle class, whatever you call it. They found out that and Brockton had another 60,000 at the time. And they did a study in that area, and they found out there was no money in that particular area. Now, did it have, of course it had money, but did it have enough money to support a store which Jordan Marsh was considered to the middle? And then they looked in New Bedford, if you look at it now probably, it's still considered, not negative now, it's a working class community, blue class community. And so as a result of that, these trustees decided that that particular Jordan Marsh site could not support Jordan Marsh because the people didn't have enough money. Yeah, down the Cape they had money. That's good for 2 months a year. What about the other 10? And so what they decided was it wasn't worthwhile to put that site at that particular location, leaving it open. There is a business term which I'll use. You business people know it right away. Other people, here's a little something for yourself. Take a note. Land banking is the term we use. Land banking means that here is a piece of property, which is a very good piece of property, but we have absolutely no use for it. So we're going to leave it dormant, is the word, by itself sitting there. And what are we going to do with it? Nothing. What is it good for? Nothing. And as a result, we're going to wait, because if you wait, locations will eventually develop into something. You can see that in around the Boston Government Center and things of that nature, how areas that appear to be rather dormant suddenly appear to be of value. And this is what the Allied store people, now I'm not using the word blame or their logic, Jordan Marsh. It wasn't Jordan Marsh who decided that that land bank, 1,000 acres, just off of Route 44 and 24 in the town of Raynham, was okay for a hazardous waste site. It was Allied store in a city called New York, in a state called New York. New York, Allied store sitting right in the middle, worth hundreds of millions in those days. Today it would be judged billions of dollars, in control of that particular location. And they decided to allow the hazardous waste to come into that site. Well, you might say we were somewhat surprised when that came to pass, and you would also not be surprised to find out that we didn't have an awful lot of people in favor of helping us prevent that from coming to that location. It wasn't in their backyard. It wasn't in their town. And yes, the Commonwealth of Mass did need a hazardous waste site. So Raynham, just get over it and allow it to go in there, because it's going in there anyway. Because Allied Store wants it to go in, and there's an agreement with the carriers and all this, and it's a perfect location for the site. And they need around 600 acres, and they're going to sell the 600. Now, it didn't seem to be of any concern to them that the remaining 300 to 400 acres would have no value whatsoever once you put a hazardous waste site in there. And so early on, selectmen at that time, Albert Porter, Don Francis, and myself, Don McKinnon, were suddenly faced with that as a problem. I'm going to give you 2 or 3 names now. I should have written them down, but you know me. You're getting to know me now, right? I'm going to say Joe McCusker would be one of the names. At that time, Joe McCusker was the town moderator. Now, I tell you, as you listen to these shows in Small Town Talk, the two prime names, title-wise, in the towns are town clerk and town moderator. Those are the two names that are important, because they basically, you don't run a town without them. They call your town meetings, which is your meeting you get together to pass laws. They basically structure the town, and the town meeting, of course, is structured by the town meeting, but the meeting is run by the moderator, and the meeting is controlled by the town clerk. So there's your answer. Next time you say, who was Joe McCusker? Joe McCusker owned a house on North Main Street. A small house next to Joe McCusker's was owned by a gentleman who we called over the period of years Dr. Joe, we called him. That's who he was to us, Dr. Joe. And who he was a administrator in Mansfield, Mass. And the town of Raynham offered him the superintendent's job in the town of Raynham if he would come to the town of Raynham when we were splitting in away from Taunton and control our town so that it would be an efficient educational community, because that's what we had. We didn't have industry of any sorts at this time. Go back historically and said the Leonard family did have the original successful ironworks, but by this time the ironworks was gone the way, and what were we? A community that offered families a good education. And Dr. Joe wasn't a doctor at that time. He would go for his doctorate degree in the future, but he moved to the town of Raynham, and his house just happened to be next to another gentleman named Joe McCusker. Well, now you see one of those names, however, you do see now, don't you? When you go up Pleasant Street and you go by what we referred to before, the Merrill School, who Lily B. Merrill was the town clerk. That was our original middle school. When you go by Lily B. Merrill, you see there's a very nice tennis court or basketball court, depending on what you want to call it. And right next to that is a building. And the building then became our junior high. And it was named after a young man that came from Mansfield, Mass. With a couple of his friends and sat down in the town of Raynham, and in the three small schools decided to make Raynham an educational mecca. And his name was E. Joseph Liberty. If you look at the right-hand side, you won't forget the name, because there it is. The junior high is named E. Joseph Liberty. And Joe Liberty was, in my world, the George Washington of Raynham, in the sense that he was the one who founded modern education in the town of Raynham, what we know it is today. And his close friend, Joe McCusker, was the moderator. Now, how do those names come into concern in a hazardous waste site? Well, down the street from the hazardous waste site, I'm sitting in the building right now as I speak to you, is now called the South School. And E. Joseph looked and saw that hazardous waste site, which is, remember now, it's up the street, and it's now off of Route 44 and 24, is the industrial site now, is the Walmart store, just so you'll be able to locate it. And that hazardous waste site was going to be within a stone's throw of one of E. Joseph's three small schools, the South School. And E. Joseph took off and was known for his estimated verbal knowledge of why a hazardous waste site shouldn't be near students and near school buildings at all. And so and then next door to him was McCusker, and McCusker came to me, and come to find out, wouldn't you know, in real life, that was his part-time job. That's not a full-time job, moderator. And so his full-time job was in Rhode Island, and he was a chemist. And he was a chemist of note of probably national reputation as a chemist. And as a result of that, no one understood hazardous waste more than Joe McCusker. And Joe McCusker told me at that time, and he referred to those things, I can't use the exact verbiage, but he referred to hazardous waste locked within this encasement. He said, those guys aren't going to be kept prisoners by that little piece of canvas. They're going to go right through that little piece of canvas, and where are they going to go? Wherever they feel like going. So that you may see that hazardous waste site encased, and they may tell you it's going to be protected to the environment. But the fact of the matter is, that isn't what's going to happen. That hazardous waste items chemically can find its way, penetrate through the encasement, and go wherever it wants to go. So what Joe McCusker told me, and then remember now, and it's true to this day, by the way, in small towns, boards of selectmen are also the board of health. It's not mandatory, but it's the way it is in many small towns, and Raynham was it. So not only as a selectman with Al Porter, Don Francis, and myself were concerned, but we also were not only administratively the executive branch in the town, but also we were members of a board of health, and therefore health became our primary concern. Most of the litigation which was founded against what we would refer to as the executive branch, the Board of Selectmen, in reality was for Board of Health issues. They are the ones much more sensitive than certainly the executive branch. And so these are the two names I've given you now. And now I'm going to give you the third name, so let me repeat the first two so we won't forget. It's on the test. E. Joseph LaLiberty, later to become Dr. Joe to you and I, and Joseph McCusker, Joe McCusker, town moderator. Those are the two names. I'm going to give you the third name, and the fourth issue are the ones that were most active in preventing anything from happening in the town of Raynham of that nature. The name I'm going to give you is the name at that town of town council. Now, Paul Cushman was town council in the early 50s, 60s, into the 70s, but he lost his sight as the time went by, and Paul took a retirement. Paul Cushman was a good counselor. He took a retirement because of his loss of sight. A young man named Billy Tripp, who you may know, his wife was a part of administration in the school system also, and Billy Tripp had passed the bar and was acting as the eyes for Paul Cushman, and would go away, volunteer to various meetings, and keep minutes and work with Paul Cushman to help him to make his legal decisions. But the time came when Paul said, I think that's it. And what we did was conduct a search, and the search wasn't very far to go, because a member of the town of Raynham's legislature, because he was a registered voter, but he was also had joined the finance committee. He was on the finance committee in the town of Raynham. And he originated from a city called Taunton. And his father owned a small retail store next to a building called Taunton City Hall. Since that's been gutted, it'll be part of the location of the new Taunton City Hall. And his name was Mark Antine. Take that down, it's on the test. Mark Antine, the attorney, became the most significant person, if there be an individual who could be a significant person, in the future of the town of Raynham. It was not unheard of for him to get on the phone and get to you and say, you did what? And then you'd have to explain what you did to Mark, and then it would be up to Mark to figure how to get you out from under that situation, which you did. Don't you do it again. Mark Antine was a town council that literally, for his piece of the puzzle, became obviously the most significant person in understanding law. And I had a town official one time from a surrounding community, and that's true, say to me, if we can get you to let Mark Antine go, maybe we can start to do something around here. But if Mark Antine doesn't want it, it's not going to happen. He is the best attorney we've ever faced. Nobody wants to face Mark Antine. So therefore, if you can just please let him go, and if you let him go, we'll be able to get some things done that we want to do. And I says, I don't want you to do the things you want to do. I want Mark Antine at my side. And later on, I'll give you a Mark Antine. There's a lot of Mark Antine stories around, and some of them are true. But those are the 4 names now that are very, very significant. They are Joe McCusker, Dr. E. Joe, Mark Antine, and the 4th would be, interestingly enough, which I will go into in the next broadcast. Now you're seeing that these things begin to intercept, don't you? That these things are not something which you can take up in a half-hour show. And the people that are needed, I'm going to show you this now, Brian. I guess we can get in on this. I'm not really sure. I have more insignificant newspaper, but some of the things are of value. If you keep enough newspapers, some of them are of value. And this one here was a member, I believe, of the Enterprise, the Brockton Enterprise. As you will see, some of the people in there now. I'm going to show you them because I know you can keep a secret. This one here is me, sitting there minding my own business, not trying to stay out of trouble. This one here is a gentleman named Alan Chalker, and at that time, Alan Chalker, this is 81 now, Alan Chalker had just been voted representative, and he beat me out in a primary, and he beat out Jimmy DuPont in the final election. He had just become a representative, and he was a force yet to become. Just as Governor King became the hero of Raynham because of the Borden Colony. He pushed through the Borden Colony for $1 to the town. He pushed it through with the work of a young representative who was probably just turning 30 and just beaten just about everybody there was to beat. And as a result of that, Alan Chalker was the key person who got the Borden Colony to the town of Raynham, which we'll talk Borden Colony at another time if you got some time some other night. But if you'll notice there now in this, I don't know if you can see it, there's a crowd of people. The numbers of people that were active in fighting this hazardous waste was in the thousands. Now remember, the town of Raynham at that time was a population of 5,000 or 6,000, and yet we had around 3,000 to 4,000 people fighting, and you can see them in the background here. And of all the people that were instrumental in the blocking of the hazardous waste, there's a line of people who'd like to take credit for it as to who was responsible for it. It was, quote, the 4th facet. McCusker, La Liberty, Antine, and the main thing was the people. The numbers of people, the legislative body in the town of Raynham opposed this hazardous waste site. In the next broadcast, we will again climax the talk about the hazardous waste in the town of Raynham and how it was defeated. But I want you to understand that, think about this. I'll give you the, sometimes there are people who, and I would never do this, who buy a book and read the final chapter so they'll know the way it's going to turn out. They just don't want to go the whole, I'm not one of them. But there are people who do that. So I'm going to give you the final chapter. The people that were active in finally defeating this were the citizens group who were going to march on the location called Allied Store Headquarters in the state of New York, city of New York. And those were the people that took on the Jordan Marsh site, who in around Christmas time were going to picket the store. And so, and then you're going to say, well, that's not fair, that's not right. I didn't say it was fair, I didn't say it was right. I said we had a job to do, and the job was to prevent a hazardous waste site in the middle of the town of Raynham. And so if you see the difference between what they were offering and what it is today, you'll see how significant it is. You see the finished chapter, don't you? And in this final chapter, it was decided that a phone call was made to me on a given day, and there was an angry man on the other side of the phone. He was president of a company called Jordan Marsh, and he said, "It's over. We're not coming to the town of Raynham." And I thanked him very much, and there wasn't much pleasant said at that particular time, except to say the job was done, and we will go over it in the next half hour, which will be the hazardous waste site in the town of Raynham. Thank you very much for watching. I remain, what's his name?